This is Open Parameter Podcast, conversations about the intersection of life and art with artists from around the world. Come chat with us on our Discord server and get monthly early access to episodes by becoming a supporting member today at patreon.com/openparameter. Hello and welcome back to Open Parameter Podcast. I'm Del Cook, and I'm joined today by my friend and co-host Stejara Dinilescu. Stejara, how are things in sunny California?
Hi, Del. Things are pretty sunny, especially in comparison to how the situation is in Plano, but not doing too bad, can't complain.
Today, I'd like to begin by listening to some music. That was Sevens, a collaboration between composer Nico Muhly and my guest today, who is Michael Caterisano. Michael Caterisano is a multi-instrumentalist, composer, producer, recording artist, software developer, visual artist, and poet based in the Bronx. Raised in a suburb of Dallas, Texas, Caterisano moved to New York in 2002 to study music at the Juilliard School, where he earned both undergraduate and graduate degrees in music. From 2009 to 2011, he held the position of Assistant Principal Percussionist with the Orquestra de la Comunitat Valenciana in Valencia, Spain. He moved back to New York in 2011 to freelance, learn to code, and today works as a percussionist, recording artist, composer, audio engineer, and software engineer. Michael Caterisano, it is an honor to have you on our program today. How are things in not so sunny New York, I hear?
Things are great. Yeah, it's it's been a little snowy. It is sunny today, at least, but we've had some snow, that's for sure. But yeah, it's great to be here. Good to see you.
So I guess we can start today by asking, what your background is, and I listed a lot of the things that you do now.
Yeah.
Professionally. You have a wide swath of talents. But how did you get started in music and in the arts in general?
Yeah, that's really my background. I mean, that list, I should probably pare down a little bit. I don't know. It's just really a function of not knowing how to describe what I'm working on at any given time. But music, definitely. is what I'm working on. It's at the core of everything I do. So yeah, I started taking piano lessons when I was very young. My dad is a drummer. Um, and so we had instruments around. And so I picked up sticks when I was a baby. They were just my toys. Drums were my toys. Uh, Started taking piano lessons when I was pretty young. And then in school, played in the percussion ensembles and things like that, and started taking lessons in percussion kind of a few years after I had been a percussionist at school. And yeah, then that was percussion is what sort of took off for me. That's where I got serious about studying music and thinking about doing it in college. Yeah, and so I went from there, uh, and was broadly interested all through college in all aspects of music. Even though I was focused on percussion, I was, I could never manage to just stay focused on one thing, which I struggled with a lot. Thinking is that a benefit or a detriment or neither? And I came away with, it's fine. Just follow your interests. But yeah, that's where my background is. It's in music.
I find myself also having I had that sort of similar existential crisis of am I a specialist or am I interested in all these different things? And my composition teacher in university told me, he said there are two types of people: there are foxes and hedgehogs. And hedgehogs like to really burrow down and become specialists, and then foxes like to jump around, and both are equally valid. And that at least really helped me. But your father was not only a drummer, but he was also a software engineer. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. He still is. Yep. He's been working in kind of telecommunications, different companies in kind of telecommunications for many, many years now. Yeah, I was just
So
talking to him earlier today about like debugging a thing he's working on. It's been a really interesting kind of new chapter of our relationship, because as a kid,
yeah.
I really never had any idea what he was talking about. And now I kind of do, you know.
Yeah, I asked that because I was wondering if because now you do software development, and we'll get in more into what that really means right now a little later. But I was wondering if software development had always been sort of there throughout your whole life, in addition to percussion, because of your father's work.
I was definitely always curious about it. Um, in school, like I think it was in maybe middle school, somebody I remember came into a class, which I feel like was a history class or some class that was not about computers at all. We had a weird week in the computer lab kind of week where, I don't know what we were doing in there. It's hard to remember, but somebody came in and taught us HTML, how to build a website, just basics of HTML markup. And I thought that was fun. And I got really into it, started making GeoCities websites like everybody. And, I did it in school a little bit for some projects. And yeah, I thought it was really interesting. But I kind of hit a wall and how far I went with it then. And it was just such a different ecosystem of technology then, too. But I sort of put it aside in college. But other engineering things kind of crept in, uh, and I didn't really realize I was moving toward learning to code per se, but I took a class in college on Max MSP. Maybe you're familiar with that software, music audio processing software, and it's basically structured like a visual programming language. That's the idea of it. You drag visual components around and connect them together, and they send data between them, and that's pretty much what code does. And so that was kind of a primer, which I didn't really realize, into the basics of how most computer languages work. So yeah, it was always kind of there, whether I knew it or not. And then it was only in the past 4 or 5 years that I started really studying, computer science. I mean, to a degree, I'm self-taught, so I've done my best. It's only I feel like I hit walls all the time, and imposter syndrome is something I understand really well now. But yeah,
Stejara probably has done. I've never worked in Max MSP. I had a lot of exposure to it in university, but Stejara has probably done the most amount of work in Max MSP at that point.
cool.
Yeah, I love Max because I started off learning like textual based, syntax based programming languages, and then kind of moved into Max. And Max is just so beautiful because you can see like these visual representations of your code, and oftentimes that helps me debug or see like different uh, structures that I may not have been able to see in traditional coding languages as well. So it's definitely a great tool.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, and Miller, the guy, I don't know if do you know Miller Puckett or familiar with them? I mean, he's like, where are you in California? You're not at UCSD, are you?
I'm at UCSB, Santa Barbara. So
Okay.
yeah, I think we've had a couple of alum do some work in Max MSP and related software, and so definitely
Yeah,
learned a lot
that's
through
cool.
that.
Yeah. A good friend of mine
Yeah,
teaches violin at UCSD, and has gotten to know Miller pretty well. It's just like Miller Puckett is the guy who wrote Max MSP, and yeah, he's pretty brilliant. It's it's a brilliant thing
yeah,
to simplify the complexity that's underneath, to simplify it as much as possible and make it as frictionless as possible. You know, it's like interesting to hear him talk about what he was going for when he built that.
yeah, definitely. And I guess I have maybe two kind of questions. One kind of follow-up question based on Max and what you had talked about learning programming. I just wanted to ask maybe how your experiences were learning programming, coming from a background that maybe traditionally doesn't have a lot of communication between these different disciplines. And I know as an interdisciplinary worker myself, and Dell as well, and you as well, you have all of these different experiences and interests. I guess first of all, like how was it learning software and your experiences, and then secondly, I guess how do these different interests of yours work together in your art practice or creative practice, and how do you see these different components? Do you see them as different tools in a toolbox, or are they more connected?
Yeah. Um, so the first question, how was it learning software? It was hard. I, you know, I sort of started learning it in this most recent iteration because uh, I wanted to work doing it. You know, I mean, like freelancing as a musician is always going to be part of my life, but there's ups and downs of it. There's more work, there's less work, and these code boot camps started popping up. My friends started doing them, and I was just thinking, like, I gotta learn this. I gotta learn it. So I approached it from that perspective, which was like maybe not the most fun way to approach it. Like, I gotta learn how to build this or that, or to get a job, and which is kind of what I was thinking. But in it, inevitably I kind of started with where I left off in high school, which was kind of web development, web application technologies, and there are a million of them, I'm sure you know. And I just kept getting stuck playing around with design and CSS and making colors go on the screen. And I was like, oh, this is what I like doing. Like, I should do this with it, which is what I've sort of since done. So when I would let myself just play, it was really fun. When I was trying to force myself to like do what I was supposed to, it was really hard. And I like kicked and screamed, but I was also driving myself at the same time. But yeah, how does it relate to everything else? Yeah, well, this recent thing I've been working on is really just an extension of that first little bit of play that I was doing. I kind of built these websites that were, I mean, it's not a website exactly. The web browser is just a rendering engine, really. So you can make it appear however you want. It's really, it has 3D rendering. It has all this stuff in it, which I thought was like, oh, this is really cool. It's just like you can make a video of a thing without a video software, which I don't really love using. So Yeah, I just started wanting to kind of the first thing I made that was kind of like art when I was learning to code was like these I made some copies of these Sol LeWitt paintings that are just these lines of color, which is like exactly what the web browser is good at doing, is making rectangles and making them be a color. So I made a bunch of those, like these infinitely scrollable Sol LeWitt paintings, basically is what they were. And I just am stuck on that same idea. I just keep making bars of color, and that's kind of what this more recent piece of software I've been working on does in a dynamic way. So it was like it took me several years to figure out how to kind of do what was in my head, but I kind of just couldn't help but keep trying to build that thing. It definitely ended up tying into music. It's really hard to separate for me. The more I try to separate things into categories, the more confused I get, you know. And it generally is best for me if I just kind of follow the images that go through my head and say, well, okay, well, how could I make that? Like, doesn't matter what that is, really. The more I think about what it is, the less likely it is I'll be able to make it real. Usually, that's how it is for me, anyway.
Yeah, that's great. And you talk about that that piece that is really inspired by Sol LeWitt's work. I really enjoy Sol LeWitt as an artist. I find his compositions extremely phenomenal, and I find that his approach to his work is very algorithmic and computational. And for those who aren't familiar, Sol LeWitt is a really wonderful artist who essentially uses these sets of rules or instructions to create these giant wall drawings in some instances, really, really gorgeous work. And the artwork itself is actually the set of rules and the instructions, not necessarily the visual depiction that comes out of that. And so I guess I was just wondering, do you find that in your own work, you kind of are inspired by these computational processes? Do you find that your making process is really driven from your experience in coding and vice versa? Or how would you generally describe your making process as a whole?
Yeah, I really am inspired by that kind of approach, as you just described it so well, the way Sol LeWitt works and lots of other artists in that kind of category work. I mean, in music, there are composers that, in the early 20th century that got really into a kind of similar process. Um, so yeah, I really like that way of working. I just usually feel like it's very hard for me to actually be disciplined about doing it. So I end up with a process-ish, kind of is what happens to me. I'll kind of start working that way, but I can't help myself if something like sparks an idea. I have to do that. I have to do that idea, whatever it is. And then it's not a process anymore. It's totally subjective, and I'm following my own tastes and things like that. And that usually is when I'm most pleased with what comes out. But yeah, I love that. I love playing around with that kind of way of doing things. I guess, what it is for me lately, and a couple of the things that maybe we'll talk about that I worked on are they're more like um, they're more like the result of some other process. It's like like they're what happens if you put these data points on a screen. Like, I didn't make the process, I just like it. And so it's like a rendering in some way of some other process that some other person made. I like to render things maybe visually that are usually auditory, or there's one maybe we'll talk about that's like distances, rendering that in an auditory way, and moving things to a different context and seeing what happens.
You said that you like to represent a process that maybe someone else made, or even perhaps a natural process. And in one of your pieces, I think you referenced, titled "Planet Sound," the process is a cosmic one. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you assign a pitch to a number that represents the distance of the different celestial bodies from Earth.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
How are you sourcing that data?
Yeah.
Because it changes.
It does change. I found a great like JavaScript library that I it's in the repository of that project. I think I credited it. I can't remember the name of it offhand, but it's there. Yeah, some enthusiast wrote this great program that calculates those distances using some formulas, basically. Obviously, I'm not actually tracking them, but it's a formulaic motion, and you can plug a date in, and you can pretty much know where they're going to be and how far away they're going to be. So it's simply that, and what I added on top of it is just plugging in the date in time and at different times. So there's a little slider where you can make the speed of time increase a lot, and then that the distances change in a perceivable way where it wouldn't be something you could perceive because it happens so slowly. But if you make time go a million times faster, then the pitches start to go up and down because planets are getting closer and farther away, and different ones are closer to Earth at different times, all of which I didn't really realize even, like that Venus and Mercury and Mars all are like take turns being the closest one to us. And but what I really like about that piece and what I was trying to just capture is like the idea of that rhythmic thing happening at this enormous time scale that we can't really perceive, but it is a time scale just like rhythms that we do use, like playing drums is a time scale we can perceive, but it's conceptually to me really it's similar.
Indeed. And that piece is sort of, it's representing an infinite process that will always be happening. Sort of in the same vein as that piece. I think it's by John Cage, of some sort of kinetic instrument in Italy, I think, that is just always playing a new note according to some sort of mechanical process, and it will always, I don't think it will always do it, but the process takes such a long time to complete that it would. Some
Yeah.
might say that the cosmic process will complete at some point. At least one New York street preacher says it once a year.
Yeah,
So
that's true. They keep being wrong, but they're still out there.
I have a follow-up question. I guess when you sonify something or kind of create this relationship between physical data and your work that kind of manifests from that data, I wonder how you're mapping these values. Do you prefer like a direct mapping of the data to what is being produced on screen, either through visuals or sound, or do you find that you take on kind of more of this process of a curator where you're imparting your own maybe aesthetic ideas onto this data and kind of working together with the data to produce the output?
Yeah, I'm drawn toward the former, and I always end up doing the latter because either I can't figure out how to do the former, or it just doesn't have the effect that I want, or it doesn't have an effect at all on me, and so then I have to change it. So yeah, with that Planet one in particular, like I had to choose a scale, basically. I had to scale the values, and that's kind of cheating. I can't map them directly to the frequencies. Like right, the distances are in the billions of miles. First you have to choose a unit, so that's the choice, and then there's no mapping to frequencies. Like the another way I've thought about doing that is to think about it more like strings. So it's really about the pairs, and then it's about ratios. I think I did another version of it a long time ago that was more like that. Like comparing all of the pairs, and then it would be like strings. Then you would get like the idea of sort of a stringed instrument, and the ratios would determine kind of the pitches. But still, then is that a low note or a high note? I still have to decide that. So there's a lot of, choice that seems inevitable in that particular one, and in a lot of different ones that I've played with where I'm mapping something to some other totally unrelated context. Yeah.
That's great. And then I guess another semi-related follow-up question. Do you work with generativity or randomness in your work? And I guess what is the relationship to that?
So much. It's my favorite. Yeah, a lot of times I do it because it's just an easy way to start generating stuff, whatever I'm doing. Random sound is interesting to me. Random placements of objects is interesting. And hopefully, what I hope to get out of doing that is to see something I like and then kind of chase that. And that continues to be like an interesting process for me. So, but yeah, in particular, the one that I used in that video, the sevens, the piece with Nico, that was one of a few that we did 3 of these pieces, actually 4, but there's 3 that are on my website, I think. For that, I developed this plugin for Logic. It's a MIDI plugin, and it generates random rhythms within some parameters. So it'll generate, it'll split a beat into 5 even parts and only play 3 of the 5 notes, but a random 3 every beat, something like that. And which was really fun for me to like play along with and create these quintuplet rhythms. And I kind of built it for myself just to practice, but I was making things and Nico saw it and said, I want to use that. I like doing stuff like that. And so it was really fun to apply it to his music. But that was definitely all about randomness with parameters.
I love kind of this description that you have where you have this randomness or generativity that's also being constrained by these parameters that are of your choosing, and really create this work. And I find that often in my own work, there's this tension between generativity, randomness, and the constraints that you're putting into the system. And the tension between those two are oftentimes what leads to a really interesting final result.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with that. It's fun for me too.
How did Nico Muhly approach you about? You said that he saw your videos, and then you two were cohort in Juilliard as grad students.
Yeah, we overlapped for several years, and he knew a lot of the percussionists really well. They had all gone to Tanglewood together when they were in high school and college, and so he was around, particularly the percussion department, a lot, and he really likes writing for percussion. And so yeah, I spent a lot of time around him playing his music at school. And I hadn't been in touch with him in a while. At the beginning of the pandemic, I bit the bullet and rejoined all my social media that I had quit because I was trying to be righteous. And it was like, wait, I'm going to be invisible. So, I abandoned all of my values and rejoined, and I was posting work. I'd been sitting on kind of some work for a little while right at the beginning of this. And I was like, okay, well, now's the time to share it. And so that plugin was one of those things. I had already been working on that. And so I put them on Instagram, and he saw them there. And he said, oh yeah, we should do a thing. And I remembered, I'd sort of forgotten that we had done this in college, but he used to send me little things to play with in college. He's just like a serial, like he's constantly writing things, I mean, he's very busy now and has so much on his plate, but, and did in college too, but he would just send me like a little minute long thing that it would somehow only take him 20 seconds to make. And I don't know how he does it. But yeah, we would go back and forth. I found these old email exchanges where we were going kind of back and forth, postal service style, making things. And so it was like that. He said, this plugin like takes some MIDI data as input. And so he was like, well, how do we do this? And I said, just send me a chord progression. And he did, in 1 second. And and it sounds like I'm like I shouldn't say that. Like, he crafts what he makes very carefully. So
no, actually what you're describing is a talent unto itself, because I think that a lot of composers in university programs today are kind of taught that. Like, I was kind of taught that indirectly, that you should have a pretty fast turnaround time. And when I've been writing for stuff, like I tried writing for video games, and the people who I'd write for video games, they would say, "This is what I want," and sometimes I would stay up until like 3 a.m. If we got done talking at midnight. I wouldn't go to sleep until I had produced something, and I would send it to them immediately, and they would be like, "Okay, that's sooner than and so than I was expecting." And so I do think that it's in certain and I can't speak for all university programs because I've attended one, but
yeah,
I think in many university programs, composers are taught you need to have a pretty quick turnaround time, because the nature of capitalism moves at lightning speeds, and you have to keep up with it, and in order to
yeah.
make any sort of money. I've heard the same thing. I've heard the same thing from others about Nico Muhly, that he's just like, here you go, there it is.
He is just so fast. Everything he does is so fast. Like texting with him is impossible to keep up with. Like he's I don't know how it works, but he's very fast.
I want to talk about another composer who you list on your website that you've worked with him. He is one of my favorite composers, and that is Steve Reich. What was the nature of your work with Steve Reich?
Yeah, I was lucky I used to play regularly with a group called Alarm Will Sound in New York. And Steve had written a new piece that they had co-commissioned, and I played several performances of that piece, and we played some of his other work. What was that piece called? A Radio Rewrite.
That was Radio Rewrite? Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So were you you performed Radio Rewrite? You're not on the recording, are you?
Not on theirs, I don't think. No, I mean, I didn't go into a studio and record it with them. Okay. But yeah, I played a bunch of performances of it in California and New York, and it was really cool. He was around the whole time and was very involved and really nice. The thing I remember more than that piece even is that on one of the programs we did clapping music, which is this the piece, and
oh yeah.
I stood up at the front and led the piece, and so I was standing there with Steve cueing all of the changes. So he was playing the part, he and I were playing the part that didn't move,
right.
And I was cueing all of the changes with my head for the rest of the group to move on to the next section. The piece, I don't know, for people listening who don't know it, is this pattern that goes like this, and people play it in unison, and then there's two groups, and the one group stays static and the other group adds an eighth note every so often, and so the parts diverge and then eventually come back together again. So I was just staring at him, and he was staring at me really more for that whole piece for several performances, and I was like, this is the weirdest, most surreal thing. Like, it's just,
I know.
Yeah, I was like, why don't you lead it? And he was like, no, I'm not gonna do it. Nico told me a similar story. He played what's the piece? Is it 4 organs? I don't know. A piece with he played that with Steve and Philip Glass, and I forget who the fourth was. And Nico had to cue all the changes, and he was like, "Steve, why don't you do it?" He's like, "No, I'm not doing it." But he said, I told Nico that, and he said, "Yeah, he's like that." But it was really great. I mean, I grew up listening to his music too. He's one of the first composers of that era that I was aware of, and I played so much of his music all through college. And yeah, it was really a treat and an honor to get a chance to meet him and work with him, and see what what he liked and what he didn't like, and it was
I did not. I knew that on your bio you'd worked with Alarmable Sound, but I did not realize that you played with him so regularly. How did you come in? How'd you come into being with them?
A friend of mine, Chris Thompson from school, we overlapped in school, is a member of the group, and they regularly needed extra players, and so I started. The first time I played with him was like right after I graduated, right before I moved to Spain. I did a tour with them. We went to Russia, which was really a trip, so to speak. And
Yeah.
we went to Moscow and St. Petersburg, and it was crazy. It snowed like crazy, and we got stuck there, and all kinds of stuff happened. But yeah, it was great. And so and then I moved, and but when I moved back, I played with them some more, and it was through my friend from school. Like most things I do, it's pretty much everything.
Like most things, many of us do. I mean, Stej and I are friends from school. The rest of my team, we all went to SMU. We all went to the same school. So it is the place to connect with artists, and then it goes away. For some people, I mean, my first 2 years out of undergrad were awful, in a certain degree. They weren't completely awful, but I had been around a bunch of, and I'm asking this because I'm wondering if either of you have had the same experience, of just after you get out of undergrad, there's like this weird period of time where you're so used to being around people your own age who you're used to working with. You get close to them, you do a ton of collaborations with them, and then you graduate, and there might, for some of us, might be a period of time where you do none of that for whatever reason. Did either of you ever have a period of time like that where it was like all, it was like everything, and then there was a huge drought?
Sure. I mean, I guess for me, I started my grad program right out of undergrad, and so I really only had like maybe 3 months in the summer to transition from undergrad to the PhD program at UCSB. And so I would say that I kind of came from having this rich cohort of people in undergrad to the exact same thing, just at a much greater scale. And for me, my experiences is just like the people that you meet in grad school are just from so many different walks of life and so many different backgrounds, especially in an interdisciplinary grad program where people start from all kinds of experiences and walks of life, I guess. And so I personally never really felt like I had that drought, but I definitely would say that when you're surrounded by these people with rich ideas and who kind of push your way of making, that's really the best place to be. I find that I learn really most from the people around me and people whose work I admire, and by engaging in kind of conversation and collaboration.
Yeah. That makes sense to me. Right. I mean, I went immediately to grad school with no break also. And then I went immediately to Spain, and that was a big jump and very different. But it was still an orchestra. So in some ways it felt the same. But what was really different was the variety of things that would happen. Like there weren't dancers and actors anymore. Big obvious change. All these different disciplines that I was surrounded by was just the one now. And concerts and different things happening, like the orchestra there. Valencia sort of had some different artistic things going on, but not nearly as much as New York, which I was really eager to continue exploring. I really enjoyed doing that when I was in school, and part of me wondered if I should, take that job at all. It was sort of on a whim that I auditioned, and I was really hesitant about going because I was like, I'm supposed to stay in New York, I think, and and I really missed that when I was there. Although I did make good friends who I'm still in touch with, who were great artists, and found a way to do it there eventually. But I missed it enough that I thought I should probably go back so I can explore whatever it is that's there for me in a professional sense.
It's funny because you said that Valencia had some disparate artistic things going on, but not as much as New York. But you told me a story that uh, before the interview that I found very interesting. You know, you're a classically trained percussionist, as you said, and um, you've spent a great deal of time performing with the various orchestras. And for the listeners who may not be aware, orchestral percussionists sometimes like don't play very much during a piece. We might play a crash cymbal here and or a triangle or a bass drum roll here or something, but oftentimes, particularly during extremely long pieces of music like operas, we might play a crash cymbal at the beginning in the overture, and then sit down and twiddle our thumbs for 2 hours. And so many percussionists, myself included, have little things that they do during these long periods of time. I've heard crazy stories just from everything of people going out to get a beer. You know, they play a crash cymbal, so they go get a beer, they hang out at the bar, they come back, they play the last crash cymbal at the end, and they get paid. Crazy story I had heard up until now. Someone started a symphony in one city, drove 20 miles to another city, played an entrance at that opera, and then that was all he had to do. And so he came back while
Yeah.
both of these productions were going, came back, finished the other symphony. But you, Michael, you win. Your story takes the cake. You did something in Spain that is like, oh my God. So why don't you tell that story? Tell me about an
Yeah.
entrance and an exit that you had in an opera in Spain.
Yeah. What opera was it? I think it was Cosi fan tutti, Mozart opera. And I was playing backstage, which required me to play a big snare drum roll about 20 minutes into the opera and then one at the very end. So my break was about 2.5 hours in between those things.
Wow.
And, in Valencia, where that hall is, there's several buildings by the same architect, the Calatrava, who's coincidentally from Valencia. Well, it's not a coincidence. That's why they commissioned him to build all those buildings. But one of them is a tennis stadium. Sometimes it's like this clamshell building that can be like multi-purpose and open and closed. It's really cool. But sometimes there's tennis there. And so somebody had a ticket and they said, yeah, you want to go watch this tennis match? It was during the opera, but I had 2.5 hours. So I went upstairs and changed my clothes and went over and watched the match in its entirety. And I went back and I still had time to have a coffee before I played my last note.
That is just so phenomenal. And the thing that strikes me the most about that is that, that area of the city that was in, you said that there were multiple buildings with similar purposes by the same architect. And,
Yeah.
some of them are multi-purpose, and, there might be an opera happening in one building and there might be a tennis match happening in another. And that's not something I really see, at least not in my city. It's not something
Yeah.
we see in America. Those two things are very different and kind of on opposite sides of the spectrum and are funded very differently. And
True.
that's my question: is in Spain, do you see sports and the arts, are they held to at a similar level of value, and are they funded the same way?
Yeah. I don't really understand so the funding thing is kind of tricky there, I think. So the opera house, all of that whole all of those 8 buildings and the things that happened in them were government funded, as far as I understood. There was some weird business and some people that I believe were arrested for how that money was being used. That was another one of the reasons I didn't stay. The
Aha.
artistic director was arrested shortly after I left.
Oh,
And we all kind of thought maybe that was going on, and it definitely was. So there was definitely some corrupted money movement going on. I don't really know. I wish I could say that Spain really values the arts, but I have no idea what's going on with the money there. Honestly, and a lot of people in the city were not very happy about the whole thing being built because it was finished in 2006 or 7, and then the 2008 crash hit Spain really hard and was very slow to recover. Partly because they can't control the interest rate of the euro, and so they're different than in the States. They're dependent on what happens with the EU interest rates. And so things were just stuck, except for this building that was getting paid for. So it was like, it wasn't so straightforward. I mean, a lot of people, I mean, not everything we did was necessarily very well attended. People, there were, articles about the salaries of the musicians, saying, why are they being paid? There was, it was confusing. I don't know. The opera was a brand new thing to Valencia. There was an orchestra prior that had been there much longer, and that had a maybe sort of totally separate kind of funding model that I never really could figure out. I don't think I'm not sure how possible it was to totally understand, to be honest, because of what was going on. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of orchestras in Spain. I mean, Germany is more of an obvious model where there are really these government-funded orchestras, and they're really well supported. And I mean, during the beginning of the pandemic, I have a friend from school who plays timpani there now, and they had all these government programs specifically for freelance musicians there. They recognized that this is like a cohort of people that exists and was affected in a specific way that needed specific support. And yeah, I don't know. Spain is like many different countries all in one still, like, and it doesn't really operate as a single entity very much. I don't, I mean, I wish I understood it well enough to understand the answers to those things, but I totally don't.
Yeah.
I mean, the history there, in the Civil War that happened there in the 30s was so devastating. I recently just started learning a little more about it, but I mean, there's some deep wounds in that country, and I certainly wouldn't pretend to understand what it's like to know what they feel like and know, but I definitely admired the culture at large. I mean, just like the pride in the food and the architecture and all of these different things that Spain has produced over the years, either by virtue of like government funding or just the people who are there just as much, it's a beautiful place. I mean, I loved my time there in a cultural sense.
Do you only restrict yourself to these art collaborations, and is that why you describe yourself as a software developer, or what professional software development do you do, if any?
Yeah, in fact, my sort of first production application just launched yesterday, and I've been staring at log files all day.
Oh man,
something wasn't working before we started, and I was like, oh no. But a friend of mine, Eric Shin, he's the principal percussionist in National Symphony, has a chain of Korean restaurants, and wanted a ordering application for the pickup orders. And another percussionist friend of mine was working on it before, and this is also the one Rob Klieger he's working on a different piece of software for Eric Shin.
Oh wow,
all percussionists.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I kind of picked up where my friend left off and finished that, and we just sort of launched that. So people are processing orders with it right now. So yeah, that's right. Software developer. It's really hard for me to choose the right term. That's a term that I put on a resume when I'm like trying to interview to get a job, which
right,
still something I'm thinking about doing, and yeah, but when it comes to just my interests, there's all kinds of other terms, like creative technologists is one people throw around. There are lots. I don't know which one to choose, kind of like we were talking about earlier. So yeah, to me, the term is sort of arbitrary, but yeah, that application that I just talked about is just a normal web app for a business, and outside of that, I'm using it to make weird art, whatever I can come up with.
You also describe yourself as a poet, and how did you get into poetry? Has that been something that has been throughout your life, or is it more recent?
Really, that poetry that is on that website is just from a period in 2019 where I just wrote a bunch of it and then I stopped and I haven't really done it since. But no, I always liked playing around with words when I was a kid and making up like sort of Weird Al style lyrics to songs was something that always kind of just happened to me as I listened to music. And, I went through a period in college where I was like learning audio stuff and making tracks and Logic and then trying to sing, but I can't really sing. And so I was like, what should I do instead? So I would like rap and I wrote all of these lyrics that way and was sort of thinking about writing while I was doing it, but not much. But I would end up with these just stacks of paper. And I was like, eventually realized, oh, I'm trying to write. And, a lot of it I wanted it to be funny, so it was sort of playing around with comedy, but it's more like the stuff that's on my website now that you're talking about. It's just, but yeah, to me, it feels the same as kind of playing music, it doesn't have to make sense. Honestly, I'm not very well read of poets. I've studied really very little. But what I have read that I like the most is when people are just playing around with words as sounds. That's kind of how they make sense to me. And if there are some funny meanings that kind of come out of that process, that's cool.
Have you considered connecting that with your generative art?
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of cool stuff that I've seen sort of in that vein, but I haven't really played around with it. Like natural language processing stuff where you're generating writing, and then like there's like voice synthesis that's gotten amazingly good where you can really just generate a perfect voice, from samples of someone's speech and that kind of stuff. I'm fascinated by all of that kind of AI driven stuff, neural network driven generative art, but I haven't really played around with it much.
I wanted to kind of touch upon just the way that you're talking about your process. I love that you've used the word play a couple of times before when you talk about making your art. And I just wanted to kind of ask your experiences, or if you felt any tension when you're making your art to try to make it look a certain way. I find that oftentimes in my head, there's this distinction between me just trying to experiment and play, and then art that I think is good, like capital A art that I produce. And I find that it's often like the work that's really successful is when I do kind of play and explore in this more kind of rigorous I guess making process. And I was just wondering if you have any experiences with that and how you kind of relate to the art that you create after it's finished.
Yeah, I always feel that tension, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I come away with, it's a generalization, but I always come away feeling like, yeah. And it's also 2020, like I'm looking back and it's easier to understand after I'm done. But like, I always want to say, right, the more I had fun, the better the work is. The more I like it, the longer I like it. I mean, there's something to, I think, just forcing myself to sit down and try. Like if I'm not, a lot of times I think I have to be like in the mood to do something. I've always been like this. I've always been like that with practice, like practicing instruments, just like if I'm not in the mood, so I'm not going to do it. And it turns out like when I don't have a choice, if I have to just get up early and do it for an hour, like it's often some of the best work I get done. I think maybe like a time limit, something that helps with that. If I can make it not so open-ended, then, if I feel like I don't want to do it when I'm starting, then it helps to know that I'm going to stop soon. And then it kind of frees me up a little more, But yeah, I'm working on something right now, another collaboration with Nico, and I did a first iteration with it, and there was a moment where I really liked it, but I didn't stop. I kept going because I was like, what I want to do is this other thing. And it just got worse and worse. And I didn't like it anymore. And I'm like, I should have stopped. I knew I should have stopped. And, so I finished that version and I put it down and I sent it to them and got some feedback. And then I did another version that was more like what I liked in the first place, Um, yeah, I don't know. It's hard. It's hard. Like that capital A art feeling like, okay, well, this has to be good. This one has to be like actually good. So I can't just play around. Like, I don't know. I think that's the bane of so many artists, processes. If they feel pressure to, okay, well, now this is like my real thing. It has to be good. I think it's pretty rare that improves the work, at least for me. But
Yeah, it's great just hearing you talk about this because it takes me back to something that I heard in a lecture recently where someone had been talking about their um, art practice and the way that they produce music and how the difference between an amateur and a professional is the amateur creates when they're inspired or when they feel like it, and a professional has to create no matter what because that's your job and you can't just wait for inspiration, you have to produce. And so
yeah.
I guess if you have any advice for people trying to start out in the scene or the industry, how to kind of juggle this this tension or this balance between doing something that you love professionally and being successful in what you do.
Yeah. The professional aspect of it, I think the best advice for that is just to do what you like as much as you can and put it out there so it's visible, and that'll work. That'll find the right people, and then there will be a path there. I think what rarely works is looking at the kind of like success you want to have, like someone else's success, and trying to do what they're doing. I think this advice is different if you're like trying to get a job somewhere. Like then I think it makes sense to go talk to the person who has the job you want and figure out how to get that job. But producing art that is supposed to reflect something about you is a different thing. And I don't know. I just heard Chick Corea, who just passed away a few days ago. There's a video I saw of him, an interview with him, where someone asked him a really similar question, and his answer was just about, he said something about along the lines of, you have to find what you like and follow that. And that's it. That's the only thing that works. You can't worry about what other people like or think about it at all. Like as soon as you do that, you're in your way and it's not going to work. So you have to spend time, really paying attention to what it is that you like. It's sort of that simple. And then owning that and following it and developing it. I think that's the only advice that really makes it. The professional success is so confusing to me. I'm not sure what it means. Maybe it means money, maybe it means jobs, maybe it means exposure, visibility. I think it means something different depending on your circumstance, so that's what I would say about it, I think.
Do you feel like that practice of make the art you want to make, the right people will find it? Do you think that's become easier through the internet, or because of the number of possibilities, the paralysis of the number of possibilities has made it actually more difficult?
Yeah. I think if you're trying to, I think it's really hard to find like viral success. I sort of think it's not a real thing, basically. I don't know. There's a guy, Jaron Lanier, I don't know how he says his name. Are you familiar with this guy? He basically invented VR. He invented virtual reality basically in the 70s, and he's a computer scientist, but thinker mostly now, and works for Microsoft and written a bunch of books, one of which is about deleting all your social media now. And I met him, actually. He's a musician, and he like had a book reading and wanted some music at it, and it was a group I played and was asked to like participate. So I heard his talk. And during that talk, he talked about kind of this issue about virality and the idea that like you can find success on these platforms. And that is like the deliberate draw of their design. And you'll see people having viral success, but the thing that's not visible is that that's like way less than 1% of people, of users, of content that does that. And so it's, you wouldn't accept less than 1% odds of anything, really, so, and but there's this unreal sense that like if I just hit, I'll be famous, or people will see my stuff, or whatever it is. And it can work, it works occasionally for people, but as a rule it doesn't work. And what's a better approach, I think, is to talk to the people you actually know and share your work with your real network and build real networks of real people by, if you can go to school or however you can do that in your real community. Those are the connections that continue to be beneficial for me, and that's the only place I can count on really being able to share anything that I've worked on. And that's your real network. Internet networks are they're a mystery, and we don't control them, and they're algorithmically controlled, and there are just so many issues that are out of your control that I don't think they make sense to use as like a plan for your work. So yeah, it's about sharing directly with people you really know and care about, and then they'll care too.
What projects are you working on right now? You said that you're working on that app for which I was very surprised to find was marketed for a musician who owns restaurants. That's amazing.
That's right.
But so you're working on that, and what other collaborative projects or creative projects are you working on?
I'm just about to finish up a project, another one with Nico Muhly. It's for his violin concerto that he just recently finished and recorded, with for violin. His first name is Pekka. I forget his last name. can't pronounce it. It's Finnish, I think. The name starts with the K. He's pretty well known. I just whatever. But it's great. It's just a section of the second movement of that piece, and I'm sort of applying this kind of algorithmic MIDI-based approach to generating some visual elements for it. Yeah. So I'm working on that now. That's will be finished pretty soon.
We can check out all of your stuff on your website. That's the best place to find all of your projects.
Yeah, I have, I think maybe a link to an Instagram handle there too. It's just my name. I have some work there too. Yeah. But yeah, I've been trying to be old school and keep a website going with my stuff on it.
Yeah.
Like my old GeoCities. It just comes back around.
Yeah. Well, Michael Caterisano, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Yeah, thank you, Del. It was really a pleasure to talk to you.
As I said, you can check out all of Michael's creations at www.michaelcaterisano.com. You can subscribe to Open Parameter by going to www.patreon.com/openparameter. I'm Del Cook, the creative director of Open Parameter. From all of us here at Open Parameter, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next week.